I think there are very few places in our culture today where and this is the bargain that I believe in. I know a lot of other people don't exactly believe in this. If a person is standing on a stage with a mic and it's clear that an audience is there to watch comedy, I think all bets are off. I think it should be a safe space.
This is Good One. I am Jesse David Fox, senior writer at Vulture and author of Comedy Book. How does a celebrity take control over how they are perceived? My guest today to discuss how she did exactly that is Padma Lakshmi. For decades as a model and in a very public marriage and the host of Top Chef, she was looked at, gawked at, and observed, but she wasn't the one deciding how she was seen. Over the last decade, that has changed. She became an advocate for women's rights and immigrants. She released her open and honest memoir, Love, Loss, and What We Ate. She left Top Chef, she created and starred in her travel show, Taste the Nation, and she started doing, if you can believe it, stand-up comedy. The last part, as you'll hear, was something I might have a little bit to do with. Padma is back in the food competition space with America's Culinary Cup. The difference is now she's in charge. So here is Padma Lakshmi. I'm here with Padma Lakshmi. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So as we start, what is the funniest, strangest, or most fascinating thing that's happened to you this week?
Well, I can tell you that I went to a cocktail party for a particular actor. And I mean, they were getting bombarded by people, and I just wanted to say hi and then leave. And coincidentally, I had just seen another movie of theirs. They had 2 movies out, and they kissed me. Not on the mouth. I just went to give, a nice social kind of hug. And I didn't even notice it. But my daughter who was with me noticed it. And she said, "He kissed your neck." I said, "Did he?" And I wish I had known this when it was happening. I would have enjoyed it more. But that made me feel very nice.
Not like a French hello or anything like that. It's just sort of like something.
He could have just missed. I don't know. I just thought I was giving him a hug. I didn't realize, I have a lot of hair, so I didn't realize he actually made contact, but I wasn't sorry about it.
Yeah.
So that was a nice, sweet thing that unexpectedly happened. But other than that, I've just been knee deep in editing my show and hanging out with my kid.
I think it's pretty good as people who are doing that otherwise are doing. I think most people editing shows and hanging out with their kids don't also get potentially kissed on the neck by whatever actor this was.
It was very special. Even in my world, it was incredibly special. I mean, I don't think they meant anything by it, but I wish I'd enjoyed it more is all.
Well, hopefully they're watching and they'll reach out in the comments.
Exactly.
So I feel like we should probably start by talking about how we know each other.
Yeah, you just reached out to me. You cold DM'd me, if I remember, several years ago, even before pandemic.
Yeah, 2018.
Wow. I can't remember the year, but I know it was a while ago. And you asked me to do a comedy show, which I literally was shocked about because I love comedy and I know comics, but I have no business in the comedy world. But you were very steadfast in your belief and faith in the fact that this would be a good thing to do. And it was. So on behalf of all the charities that we have benefited, thank you for pushing me to do it. It was really, really, I mean, you are single-handedly responsible for a new avenue that has opened up in my life that I, more than anyone else, am shocked by.
I will not say I was planning on that when we first started it.
How could you? There's no evidence to indicate that at all.
Well, it's just so essentially the story is, I think it was like Louis C.K. was coming back at the Comedy Cellar and you just sort of tweeted, "What about instead focusing on these comedians?"
Correct.
I was like, what a surprising list of comedians for a person who is not in the world to know about. And now those people makes sense to me. It's
my gosh.
It's like Bowen Yang and like
I'm
Matt Rush.
so proud of our roster because it's, we had no way of knowing. But yes, I mean, when we did this show 7 or 8 years ago now, people who were up and coming like Nikki Glazer and Bowen and Matt and, all these other people are now totally big. And I feel very justified in my taste and yours, of course.
Sure.
But yeah, it was basically I went on a Twitter rampage, which is not something I would do today. Now it's Threads, I guess. But I love Threads. But the comment section on Threads is priceless. And so, I started listing all these comedians who I thought deserved that platform and would really benefit. Great New York comics, women, people of color, queer. Jay Jordan, that way we found all of these wonderful people. And it's been a lot of fun. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been so much fun. It's been, I've always admired comics, and I know some personally who are actually A-list real comedians. So I've always admired it. And I think that there's nothing more vulnerable than being on a bare stage with nothing but a microphone and your intellect and mind and creativity. And when you have people staring back up at you and those lights are really bright, you have to think on your feet. Because maybe, this has been my very, very nascent experience in it. But, sometimes the material lands and sometimes it just doesn't.
Yeah.
And you can't keep insisting on using the stuff in your pocket if it's not landing. And I think there's something so excruciating, but also exhilarating about that when it does land. And when it doesn't land, it's okay. There have been times when I've bombed, at open mics and stuff, like on the Upper West Side, for example. And it's felt really icky in the moment. And it's also hard because when you're somebody who people are used to seeing do one thing or known, it's hard to fail in private. But it's even in those moments, it's been, even that humiliating experience or that difficult, icky, uncomfortable experience has been beneficial to me because I didn't die.
Yeah.
I still went home. I still had breakfast the next day. And it was a very humbling experience. And I think it's important to have those challenging moments if you are a creative person. You don't necessarily have to throw yourself in the deep end of stand-up comedy like I chose to, but I think it's really important in life, in whatever you do, whether you're a venture capitalist or a florist or a surgeon or a teacher, to continually challenge yourself intellectually.
Yeah, you kept at it. So essentially, like the first time you kind of said a couple things, and then each time you would sort of say more, and then by the last few ones, you do 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And what have you found? Like, where does it come from, the desire to? And now you pursue it unrelated to the shows.
Yes.
And you're quite both passionate and diligent about it in a way that I think definitely surprised. Because I think like some people are like, oh, maybe we'll do it as a hobby, but like you are pursuing it. What has been motivating you to do it the amount you've done it?
I think it uses a part of my brain or spirit that doesn't get tapped a lot. And I think I need that. I had done one TV show for 17 years. Then I did both TV shows for 5 years. And then I was working on the cookbook for 7 years contemporaneously. Yeah. And so I was just really aching to have something that was separate from that. And, I was an actor and I did a lot of improv before the food stuff took off. And I'm very thankful for the career I have. It was completely unexpected. But I did miss a certain kind of creativity that is not utilitarian and not politically correct and not catering to the demands of a TV show, a publisher, yada, yada, yada. And, I do things when I'm on stage as stand-up that I would never do anywhere else. It allows me a way to get my most intrusive thoughts out somewhere. Yeah. And, I say things I would never also say even in my social media, especially in my social media. And I love that construct. I think there are very few places in our culture today where and this is the bargain that I believe in. Yeah. I know a lot of other people don't exactly believe in this. If a person is standing on a stage with a mic and it's clear that an audience is there to watch comedy, I think all bets are off. I think it should be a safe space. There are lots of comedians that I gravely disagree with on many things, but even those people, I think they should have some space to say all those things, And again, not that I think they're all funny, not that I agree with them, but there should be somewhere in our culture to be free. And that's what I like about stand-up.
I believe there's a story about UCB that it's when I first learned that you took improv classes. And then I remember you'd finished the classes and then you were like, can I take the classes from the beginning again? What's it like? Do you have a sense of what it's like for these aspiring comedians, who knows what, to be in a class with you?
It can be awkward because, yes, 15, I think probably 16, 17 years ago, I went through the UCB professional program or whatever it's called, and I loved it. And in fact, I performed at their old theater, and on the way, my last performance, on the way to the performance, I didn't know it then, but I was already pregnant and I got in a car accident. But I still made it to the theater because I really wanted to go. And even then it was weird because New York Post covered the event, which it was really like a daytime show on a Saturday, that there should be no press at that. And I'm kind of very into press at comedy to begin with, for obvious reasons. I know you're a comedy journalist, so present company notwithstanding. But, so that kind of irritated me. And so then I just let it go. Something had to give. I had 4 jobs. I didn't have the time and bandwidth. And then now my kid's older and we were doing those comedy shows. And you're right. For the first few years, I would just come on, thank everyone for being there, and literally let, Bowen and Matt handle the heavy lifting of hosting the thing. And I sort of had the beautiful pleasure of being surrounded by all these comedians and just going deeper and deeper and deeper into it. In effect, in a very safe space. Because the heavy lifting of being funny wasn't on me, except you never knew what comedians were going to be there until the last minute. You just knew I was throwing the show. What was your question?
What's it like for you?
It's weird because, first of all, they're all aspiring actors and comedians, and most of them are young enough to be my kids.
Yeah.
Like, I have these wonderful girls from my last improv group that are literally like 23 and 24, and I even tried to hire a couple of them on this new, America's Culinary Cup, and I couldn't do it because of different rules and stuff. And I love it. It keeps me current. It's weird for them because, it is only weird for them in the first couple of weeks. But, there is, if you haven't watched any of the shows I've done, it's not weird.
Yeah.
You just know there's some, pretty middle-aged lady there. But if you have, it can be a little unsettling at first, but then hopefully that goes away when they know, I'm still...
You're still doing it.
I'm still doing it. I'm still learning. And so I did. I think that's cheating a little bit, but I knew that I didn't want to assume I remembered or knew anything, and I didn't want to do that celebrity thing of like, I want to join, at 103. So I actually started at the bottom again, and I did... I think 3 different stints or semesters or however they call it. But I actually put myself back even after that because I don't think I learned enough in one class and I didn't want to graduate. So I held myself back.
Yeah, because I imagine so many of those classes, they're helping teach young kids just to be confident enough to like be on stage. Where it's like you start with that part where you're like, I could talk on camera so easily, but you're like, okay, but like, am I actually doing the true lesson of like whatever the improv is?
Exactly.
Has anyone from your classes then become successful?
No, because that's been very recent.
Got it.
They are booking stuff, and it's always exciting to know that they got a guest role on, SVU or whatever. But I mean, I will say this. Yes, I don't have, those jitters of speaking in front of people. And that class is always like 15, 16 people. So that goes quickly for everyone. But my brain is not as quick. It's not. I have to have the humility to admit that as those young people. So that's why I also put myself back.
Yeah.
I really felt that I wasn't getting enough out of it. And I also wanted to try a different teacher. And so that's why I did it. And also, by the way, that was happening contemporaneously with us doing our shows, both, at Dynasty Typewriter and at the Bell House.
Yeah.
And so what came out of that in improv was the place that I enjoyed most was being the monologist or the monologuist, as I call it. I don't know why they say monologist, but, I had done that at ASCAT.
Yeah.
I want to say 12 years ago. And then I also did it at Second City and then, Rat Scraps. And I've been on a few of those places more than once. And I've done other improv shows. And I like improv. I did the Brooklyn Comedy Fest. But what I like the most is telling stories. And that's when, and it was actually a combination of you and my teacher, who I'd had more than once and had way back when or whatever. And she said, you should really do stand-up. She did. She said, you're funny. She said, and one time she said, you're not supposed to make stuff up. I said, I didn't. And then she was like, you're supposed to just get the prompt from the audience. And I said, I did. And, so she said, then you should do stand-up. Because I think we've got a lot of misery in our lives in general. Even if you have a good life, there's a lot to be depressed about. And I do think when you're getting up on stage and you're holding people's attention or trying to, you should make them feel better. You should make them laugh or think, or hopefully both.
Yeah. You told Helen Rosner in The New Yorker, I don't care about being the most beautiful woman in the room. I want to be the funniest person in the room. Can you think of specific rooms where you were definitively the beautiful woman in the room and you wanted to be the funniest person, or you knew you were the funniest person, but they saw you as the beautiful woman in the room?
I think the latter. I'm less beautiful now than I was when I was 27, and hopefully I'm funnier now than I was 27 too. And that's fine. I'll take that trade-off any day of the week. But, I think for a long time I was lucky enough to be in many rooms with a lot of interesting people. And I was presumed to just be the arm candy of whoever I was with, or, some fluke had gotten me there, or I was there because of how I looked, which probably was the case sometimes, but I didn't want to be. I know the people, I'm just speaking on behalf of my own taste and assuming everyone else has the same taste. I don't care if I'm hanging around with good-looking people, because I know that's no accomplishment of their own. It certainly wasn't an accomplishment of mine. Now, at 55, I try and preserve my looks and exercise and all that shit. But, I mean, truly, I am attracted to people who make me laugh, and I want to be around them. And when I have dinner parties at my house, it's to facilitate that environment. I try to surround myself also with talented, interesting people as much as I can, because life is like tennis. Playing with someone who's better than you improves your game.
Yeah.
And so that was also the appealing part of doing the shows with you, is just to get to be in proximity to all these people that I admired.
Yeah. When you were on 30 Rock in 2009, they had you say, men always tell me I'm very funny. And then you tell a joke, which is you just say, knock, knock, and Alec laughs.
Yeah.
Making fun of that. The idea of essentially what we're talking about. Do you remember filming that and how you approached it? Because you are funny in that scene. Like, that is...
I don't remember how I approached it. I do remember... whatever you think of Alec Baldwin, and there's lots of things in his life to think about. What I will say about Alec Baldwin is that he was an incredibly generous and supportive actor. He also did his coverages first, which is when the camera's on him, so that I could practice my lines and be comfortable. And, as an actress, I've been on many sets, not for a while, but when I was acting actively, and that is not always the case, especially when you're a guest player for the day or the week or the episode. There's always an energy of being, in or out of that core group. And he made me feel very welcome, very supported. And I'll always remember that experience. And he's really funny.
Yeah.
So it makes you funny. And I don't remember feeling like, oh, I nailed it, or I was funny at all. In fact, I kind of walked off set bewildered, like, did I do it? Do you want another take? They're like, no, we're going to move on. But, I have no idea. And I say the same thing to you when I walk off a set at Bell House. I'm like, did I say everything I was supposed to? Did that land? Because I black out when I go on. And that happens not only when I'm doing stand-up or a guest role on 30 Rock. That happens in life when I'm on book tour. That happens a lot. It happens on podcasts. Like I'm not gonna remember any of this.
That's
so
fine.
I'm
That's
glad
perfect.
you're recording it, you know?
That's better. So you're funnier in your new show, America's Culinary Cup, than you got to be in Top Chef, in my opinion. And so, one, you tell jokes, but there's a moment in the second episode where you ate something. I don't want to spoil what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, the other judges are like, this is, and then you just go,
I know.
It's pretty fucking good.
Yeah,
And at the end of the sort of commentary, and I was like, and they bleep it, and I was like, this is going to be on CBS. And I was just like, this rules. This is a different tone, or you just got to be, and it's your show. Can you talk about what you wanted to present, how you had those conversations of like, hey, just, like, if I'm coming to this world, it's going to be this version. I'm not going to be sort of as proper as you especially were at the beginning seasons of Top Chef. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a few reasons for that. I am not the same person who started in 2006 or 7 or whatever that was. I'm a different person. The world is a different place also. And I think I'm my fuller self now in general. And I'm also the boss. I mean, there are a lot of people who work very hard to make this show with me that I rely on for counsel. You know, my network executives, Gloria and Mitch, my showrunner, Josh Silverman, my producing partner, Susan Rovner, all the cadre of gorgeous, talented producers who, again, I want their opinions, because they're very valuable and they come to the table with a different set of expertise than I could have. But at the end of the day, as I've grown into my own career, and I had no way of knowing this was the career I was going to have. It's sort of ludicrous. There's no way to plan for my life. I think I just felt like I'm going to do it. I just felt that the genre also needed a breath of fresh air and not, taking ourselves so seriously. And I didn't want to do that with myself. Like, I don't need to prove that I'm an authority of anything. I'm not pretending to be a chef. I'm a food writer. I'm a home cook. I hopefully do television shows that people like, and that's it. I don't want to be a chef. I don't want people to think I know everything. And I also see myself as the audience's representative. I don't see myself as sort of this lofty judge on high. I have two people who are very well respected on either side of me to take that role. I feel like I should be the one that the viewer is living vicariously through. And, sometimes you say stupid shit. You say what happens. And of course, we have to bridge the gap between what's normally on CBS and who I normally am. And we've tried to do that. I think hopefully if we get, touch wood, a second season, we'll be better about that. We have so much of me being weird and insane and just saying shit off the cuff that is on the cutting room floor that had no chance of making it in there. I have a lot of heartfelt conversations with S&P, Standards and Practices, and CBS is network. It's not anything I've had to ever deal with. And so, it's a learning curve. I mean, there were a lot of things that I said that were way more off color than that,
It's how a person would talk if that was the case. It was just, I've watched all these shows. People don't say stuff like that. They have to be so reverent all the time about everything that's happening, even though it's a food.
And I think that's unreal.
Yeah.
And so this is supposed to be reality television, and it's very, much of it is not real. Yeah. So in that sense, I really did want to just be my normal full self there. And, I have, as you know, no poker face and no discretion. So, I knew that it was a heavily edited show. I knew I was going to look at every edit. And I think that's also something that very much encouraged and helped me to do that, because if it didn't work, and there was a lot of shit that didn't work, we're just cutting it out. I think, next season, if we have the budget, I wouldn't mind hand picking somebody to help me gauge that, because I have so many things that I'm doing. I have my producer in one ear. I have a director in this ear. I want to be present and listen to not only my judges, but the chefs who've cooked their hearts out. And I'm thinking of lighting and how is this going to cut? And are we saying enough the audience understands? So there's a lot of things going on. Luckily, I do have 7 voices in my head in my own life, so I'm used to it. But I want to have somebody who's bringing that out more, not only from me, but also Wiley and Mike, because the thing that people don't know about those two is that they're really funny. And we didn't have room. I mean, I'm still in the process of editing, the second half of the show with my producers, but there's so much funny shit that got said in that elevator as we're closing the door that we don't have time for. And, it's sad because that's not what the show is about. And CBS doesn't really have back-end credits that roll. But I wish we had that so that you could just see that blooper reel. Maybe you can the next day on streaming or something. There's a lot of funny stuff. And it just got worse and worse and worse, or better and better and better. Mike and Wiley, who are friends and know each other, but live on opposite coasts, had this bromance that blossomed. And there was all kinds of stuff. They're also really funny and deadheady. And so they had a lot of puns, and we just don't have room for that.
Yeah. Because people want to see close-ups of...
My dream is that, like RuPaul's Drag Race or whatever, we can have an ancillary, secondary show that just has all of the weird bits in it, sort of like end pieces,
That's so funny. I was like, this is a little bit more RuPaul's Drag Race-y in little moments. You are the judge number one. Like there's moments in episode 1 where you have to make final decisions. And I was curious, like, if you can talk about when you started at Top Chef, you've talked about a little bit having a certain amount of imposter syndrome because you're like, these are chefy chefs, and not just like, oh, these are chefs. These are like the names. Can you talk about if you have any memories of times sitting at these tables and feeling like, oh, I should not talk now, or I don't have a place here?
Oh, constantly. There's a lot of differences that help me now. Not only that, I'm creating the show and making these decisions with counsel, but ultimately, if I don't want it, it's not going to be there. But it's also because there's only 3 of us. There's not 4 or 7 of us. There are episodes where we do have, guest judges, and there's many of us. And part of my job as a host is to facilitate other people talking. So that means there's only so many amount of minutes in a network show. We have to cut to selling soap or whatever. And thank you, Dawn, Power Wash, who gave me $1 million check, no questions asked, which was great. I mean, literally on the fact that I was having a new show and I had a little deck, like a PowerPoint presentation, we emailed them. So thank you to Dawn. But I think at first when it came out, television was different, and they wanted something very intimidating and imposing and serious and authoritative that would sort of raise the tension and make them shake in their boots. But that's not this show.
Yeah.
This show is about well-known chefs who have been accoladed, who have been in business for a long time, who are really good at what they do. I don't need to impress people with my food knowledge. I'm not pretending to be the expert on everything. And I think that's what also takes the pressure off, and not having that imposter syndrome follow me around like a terrible shadow. It also happens to be a function of life and knowing more now than I did in, I hope so, 2007. And also a lot of male chefs who are decorated veterans of the industry, like, really have an ego. And I think they, at the time, were just like, well, who is she to, and now I don't think people feel that way, or if they do, then they're the ones who look like the asshole,
You said,
and I think you saw that also on TV.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can tell. Yes. As a fan of Top Chef, I felt like I could tell when you were annoyed at Tom for him being too much of a, getting out of his chef way, like ultimately being like, this must be rewarded because these follow these rules of a chef's value system, and you just did not care about said value system. And it's nice in this.
But here's why.
Yeah.
Not that at times he may not have had valid points. It's because I don't think that diners look at it that way.
Yeah.
Like, nobody ever said, wow, the knife cuts on this dish are so great. Like, look at that brunoise, you know? Like, we notice it. And on America's Culinary Cup, we'll give points for it. It's called technique.
Yeah.
But the audience doesn't give a shit.
Yes.
You know, I mean, no restaurant goer or diner has ever left a Yelp review saying, you know,
the knife cuts were sloppy, and as a result, I had a 4-star experience.
Yes.
Well, it's also nice watching a food show where you want the food to be spicier, right? There's no note being like, well, so for an audience, the general audience, this might be too. It's like the goal is to cook how you would cook, and it's like I don't think I've seen that on a food show really.
Here's why. What I want to do with this show is really celebrate regional American cooking. Yes, I want a kick-ass, successful show. I don't really make a lot of money unless it's syndicated everywhere, full disclosure. But beyond a good, successful show that people love, I'm looking to create an institution, a new American institution that is as prestigious and sought after by people in that industry as the Oscars are, or the Grammys are, or Wimbledon is, which is why we want to make sure we equip our kitchen and these chefs with every possible toy they could want.
You said when he passed that Anthony Bourdain really helped you with imposter syndrome when he was on Top Chef. Can you share any memories from what he was like?
I mean, Anthony also had his own evolution, you know, and when he first came on, he was sort of this bad boy chef. And then, you know, I knew him. I wasn't close to him, but I knew him somewhat well for 20 years. And, you know, we also have very dear friends in common in, you know, our publisher, Dan Halpern, and, you know, and Eric Ripert and stuff. So I saw an evolution in him too once he had children, you know, and so he became a softer Tony that was still, you know, still who he is, still swashbuckling, still sort of irreverent and not afraid to say whatever he wanted to. But he became somebody who was more encouraging of different kinds of expertise and intelligence. And I think in the course of doing his job and where he really found himself was traveling the world. And, you know, if you look at that show, it's basically B-roll. It's, you know, Tony having a great time wherever he went. And he wrote that show in the voiceover. And he's such a great writer, you know, and I think that also was something he found in the second half of his life, you know, and I'm happy for him that he found that because he also demonstrated to me, and, you know, I think about that. I think about how the more he was really himself and had the humility to saying, I'm learning along with you, the more he had success. And I think the one thing that Tony did was get over his ego and understand that where true growth came for him and his audience and his work was somewhere else besides being this kind of hard-nosed chef. And I think the travel helped with that. And I think seeing him as an example and having him encourage me helped me to do that. And I mean, if you look at Taste the Nation and you look at Tony's, you know, different, whatever they were called, they were always, it's kind of the same show. They're very different, which is why, you know, you can have me, Stanley Tucci, Kamau Bell, Tony Bourdain, who am I missing here? Guy Fieri. You can have all of it. And Lisa Lang even, you would bring her in. I mean, unfortunately, you know, me and Lisa are the only women in that group. But you can have us all go to the same city and even visit the same restaurants. And the episodes would be completely different. And that is great.
Yeah. I remember when you were filming the show, you're talking about how you weren't, you know, before you were not sure if you wanted to get back in sort of food competition. And
I didn't.
And you were talking about
not sure. I really didn't.
Sorry, you specifically said you did not want to, but then you were talking about how much fun you're having. And partly it was how much control you had over the show. And then you're talking about like, I stocked the kitchen or whatever. And I was,
well, no.
Like you chose
I chose a very skilled, I chose a very skilled culinary producer named Mary, who is a badass. And she worked under Joel Robuchon for years. She's a chef herself. She went to UC Berkeley. She's a very, very thoughtful person. She did the pantry, and then I checked her work. And I went through the pantry with a fine-tooth comb because I'd had the experience years after years of chefs complaining about what was there, what wasn't there, whatever. And I wanted to make sure that we had not only a lot of variety of ingredients, but specialty ingredients that were germane to those chefs' backgrounds, and a lot of different ethnic ingredients, for lack of a better word, and fresh ingredients. And to Mary's credit, I did not have to correct 98% of anything. And there were things that I objected to that she had in there, like, ready-made curry paste, which I was like, I don't know about this. But she's like, they can still, church it up. But I'm like, I let it slide, But for the most part, let me be clear, she did the work. Yes. I just checked her work.
Was that something that you felt Top Chef did not? They had obviously had tons of stuff, but they did not think about, like, make sure to have every possible ingredient certain cuisines might need?
No, I think that, the show, which has been on so long, and of course, I don't know what's happened in the last, 3 years because I haven't been there. The show grew and evolved too, as did culinary life in America and in the chef world. So, there were all sorts of things that were improved upon and made better and changed depending on where we were, in the country and stuff. So it's not so much that. I think that's more a function of where you're shopping also, And look, Top Chef, I want to be clear, Top Chef is a house I also helped build, and I have no desire to tear that house down. I'm very proud of helping to build that huge legacy. And I just wanted to do things that were reflective of my view of the world. And hopefully that resonates with other people. And by the way, I didn't do this also on my own. I checked my work too, every step of the way, with a lot of very esteemed chefs from all over the world who I trusted and knew had a whole body of knowledge I didn't have, and certainly practical knowledge I didn't have. So I relied heavily on a lot of chefs that I had built relationships with to say, does this ring true to you? Does this feel odd? Is this kosher? All those things. I just know what I want in the kitchen. And so I wanted it there. And then I just know what chefs need because of the feedback that we've gotten.
How do you approach being a boss? How has that evolved?
How do I approach being a boss? I think I don't think of myself as the boss. I think of myself as the one who's responsible for any mistakes that happen. And I don't want them to be from my side of the street. I think it's been very frustrating for me when I've worked with people who haven't known what they want. And I try to be very specific in communicating what my vision is. And I'm happy to be challenged on that and taught something that's a better way. I also think half your work is done for you when you gather the best people you can and then let them do their job. Yeah. So, I don't know what lens to use, but I know who does. And that's actually, I think, the next evolution of my own development. I think I would like to shadow DP and just literally wear sneakers and be a silent gopher or focus puller, if anyone will let me pull anything, but, other than my back. But, I think that's an important part of my education as I become as I get more experience as a filmmaker and auteur. I think that is a big place I need to fill my education. Yeah. But I knew what I wanted. I was very clear, and I really knew how I wanted the set to look. I didn't want it to look like a game show. I didn't even want it to look like a reality show. I wanted it to be pure. And I don't know if that's boring.
No.
I don't know, I guess the audience numbers will tell me.
But I think that, the thing is, the thing that, as a person who's followed your career, and I was thinking about that, I was thinking about your career, and I was thinking about even you pursuing stand-up in the show, I was thinking about the idea of, being in control and having control over things. And there's a quote from Mark Maron who says, people become comedians to control the way in which people laugh at them.
Oh, that's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Does that resonate to you? Do you feel like you had memories where you did not feel in control of how people perceived
Oh,
you?
yes. Yes. For years, I had no control of the narrative of my own life in the public,
Yeah.
in the media. Thank you, New York Post and Daily Mail. But I think that changed for me 10 years ago when I wrote the memoir. And
Literally the next thing I was going to say.
that was an excruciating experience. I mean, that was more excruciating than stand-up because it was a 5-year excruciating experience.
Because you started you didn't go into it to write a memoir, right? You went into it like, I'll write a self-help book about like how to be whatever.
Yeah, not at all as a memoir. It was supposed to be a healthy eating book. And then I just, I was always going to be really personal, using the details of my own life to illustrate my philosophy about food and eating. And then I just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. And, as I said earlier, my publisher, Dan Halpern, who I've now published, 3 books with, was very encouraging of that. And sometimes I would tell him, like, Dan, I don't know what I'm writing here. Like, I'm lost in the forest of my own words, which happens a lot in stand-up too now. And he would just say, like, look, just keep writing. You just write. We'll chisel what doesn't need to be there out, but you just keep going. And I did that literally for 5 years. And in those 5 years, my life changed. I lost a partner to brain cancer. I had a child. All these kinds of things happened. And so the book really evolved that way. But I also think now, the one great thing about writing a memoir is that you can actively out yourself. And so there's nothing anybody can say about me that I haven't said about myself. And I also am less thin-skinned now.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect me in the same way.
Not to get into it, but there was 4 months ago, there was a rumor about you dating a former Top Chef contestant. And I don't need to indulge the rumor. But as you said, there was a time where your dating life was like very much in the news and talked about a lot. And I think it was a time probably before this version of the internet. So there's probably a lot of young people who did not know that you've had all this sort of negative experience. Was that triggering for you when that happened? Or did you find it just funny?
Well, because I have, again, a bigger sense of humor about myself now, and it didn't affect me at all. I found it amusing, and but also because it was largely positive, and not out of the realm of possibilities. So I found it charming.
Yeah.
And this is a person I love anyway. In one sense, maybe not in the sense that everyone else thinks. But so I what was I going to do? Be like, no, that's not true.
And how dare you speculate about me?
No, not at all. Like if I was leaning that way, that would be a great person. But so it doesn't affect me as much. I also think, for a long time, whether it was on social media or internet or whatever, it did bother me because there was so much focus on my personal life rather than my professional life.
Yeah.
And I was frustrated about that. And it made people think that I didn't have a professional life because all that you heard about was this other stuff. When the truth is, I'm doing the same thing I'm doing now. I was doing that in 2000. Like my first cookbook came out in 1999. My first food show on the Food Network came out in 2000. So. And
you were writing articles, like.
Right. I was a journalist. I wasn't hard-hitting, covering
you were a
war.
writer.
But
truly.
I was. I had a syndicated column in the New York Times. I was writing for Vogue. I was writing for Harper's Bazaar. I had a style column there. And, nobody reads bylines. Nobody cares. It's sort of like they just want to see the picture.
Yeah. The book it's really a stunning book. And I think there's a thing that you're really amazing at in it where you have such a sense memory for food, and you're able to then sort of have that as sort of a tactile basis, but then you have all these ideas and you're able to tie it in, and then you'll use your history and then your sort of family history and then sort of your political points. And
are you talking about the memoir or this new book? Okay, the memoir, yeah.
You also do it in the new book, but I was thinking about the memoir because I read it for this, and there's a part that was really moving because I've had your Kumquat chutney before, and it becomes a sort of mythic thing. I was wondering if you could tell a version of sort of how that recipe meant so much to you at a time and connected you so much to your mother and your grandmother?
I think food for a lot of us is so compelling and important, even if you're not in the food business in any way, because it follows us throughout our lives. And it is a sensorial experience that is connected to your emotional life because of the biological reason of the emotional memory being stored in the amygdala and the olfactory sense being stored in or activated from the amygdala. And so those things are very close in physical proximity in your brain. That's why you can eat a cookie or smell some cologne and it immediately transports you back to when you had those first experiences and the emotions tied to them. I was going through a very public and messy divorce, and I was living among all these cardboard boxes in a hotel that is now very swanky, but at the time I was living at it, it wasn't. They just gave you long-term leases, and they had a kitchen. And it's called the Surrey Hotel, and I used to call it the Sorry Hotel, because a lot of people who were getting divorced in New York City, I've met actually a lot of men that have stayed there, but I stayed there for a good 6 months.
TV show.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, thank you. And so my mother, in an effort to cheer me up, sent me a box of kumquats, and we had this giant. We still do. My mother's house had this giant kumquat tree, and I grew up eating them. And I think they're kind of a rare fruit unless you grow up where lots of citrus is grown. This is in California. And I used to chomp on them. You know, she used to try to get rid of them and make whatever she could. And so she sent me this box of these beautiful kumquats. And I didn't feel like cooking. I didn't feel like eating. Cafe Boulud is in the ground floor of the Surrey Hotel. And Gavin Kaysen, who's cooking there, wonderful chef, used to send me up trays and trays of beautiful desserts, and just to cheer me up. And God bless Daniel Boulud, because at different points in my life, he doesn't probably even know this, but, he has been an instrument of solace and pleasure with the foods that he's given me. I mean, he used to also send home foods that my ex-partner liked when he had cancer and didn't feel like eating and stuff from Danielle. So, I just didn't want to eat. And it's very rare in my life that I've suffered from a lack of appetite. It's one of the reasons I'm good at my job.
Sure.
And, she sent me this kumquat box, and it just fell on my head because I had sort of stuck a bag of it up on the highest box. I mean, there was stuff everywhere. And I just thought, okay, I have to do something with this. And I could make this very quick chutney. And it just brought me back to life. It just reminded me of other parts of my life that were happy, that were full. And it kind of woke me up out of my stupor, not only emotionally and mentally, just sort of like saying, get over yourself. A lot of people get divorced. Just walk through this lake of shit and you'll get to the other side. But also with my palate, it woke up my taste buds. And I could make that as spicy as I wanted to. And it reminded me that there was a whole world of lovely flavor and pleasure out there, and that I'm in a very privileged place and I should take advantage of it.
Yeah. You mentioned in the acknowledgement of the book that you had a sort of late in her life mentorship with Nora Ephron.
Yes.
Can you share any memories with her?
I mean, Nora and I met her because Susan Sarandon took me to an Oscar party, and I was introduced to her there. And then, it was already within a couple of years, or 2-3 years, if I remember correctly, of when she would pass away. And I've always loved her writing. And I asked her if I could take her to lunch. And we would always eat at Maria. And it was closer to where she lived. And, we would meet, I want to say, 4 times a year, not that much, and it was also at a very difficult point in my life. I was being sued for full custody of my child. I was nursing somebody who was dying of cancer. I was trying to deliver this, memoir or now memoir. There was a lot of shit going on. And she, was wonderful because she was someone I very much admired and looked up to. She was also someone who's gone through her own set of shit in life. And she was very encouraging. And I've been very lucky to have quite a few really spectacular, intelligent older women who have mentored me in my life, which is why I try to make it a point to also mentor young writers. Priya Krishna, who writes for the New York Times, is a great example of someone who's been a mentee of mine for a decade, and clearly now she doesn't need any mentorship. In fact, she's one of the judges on the show. I think I can say that, if not, oh well, for one episode. But anyway, so she would tease me and ask me how stuff was going, and I would tell her I didn't know what I was doing and everything. But she said, "Oh, honey, if you did, I would kind of question you." But she called it Love, Loss, and What We Ate, because she had adapted as a stage show with her sister Delia a tiny picture book called Love, Loss, and What I Wore. And she had adapted that for Broadway. And so she would tease me, and the working title in her head for my book was that. And then it just stuck. Yeah. I couldn't think of a better title. And I was happy that it was bequeathed to me from Nora. And I didn't know she was sick. I know her son. I didn't know she was sick. I learned about it just like everybody else did. And once I found that out, I was even more grateful that she still
made so much time for you.
Yeah.
When the book was coming out, you were saying you hoped your daughter would read it one day.
She still hasn't.
She's now reading age, though.
Yes, I keep telling her that too. She reads plays and scripts and whatever she has to for her social studies and English class.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. She does have homework. I forget that.
She has a lot of homework. Yeah, she's at a very demanding art school, and she usually doesn't come home until 6, and then she's got to eat, and that's her excuse anyway. I mean, her peers, I know a few of her peers have read it, but she has not read it.
She will at some point, and then you can listen to it.
I told her that. She's like, yeah, like I need to hear you. Yeah, she's been listening to me bitch at her all day about cleaning her room.
It is very much your voice the entire time. But assuming she will, what do you hope, what parts are you most excited for her to read?
I'm most excited for her to read about all of the parts before she was born, and even before the first 40 years of my life were really difficult. I had a very big car crash that influenced everything about our lives, me and my family. I had a very rare illness that had me in and out of the hospital most of my adolescence. I didn't know my father. I didn't see either of my parents from the age of 2 and 4. Yeah. So, considering where I'm at now, my life is golden. Like, I'm so glad I came out the other side. And so she only knows the version of mommy that, has hair and makeup, that lives in this big house, that, people want to take pictures with when we're at the market.
Yeah.
She doesn't know the Padma that was on financial aid, that only ate spaghetti for the first 6 weeks of every semester because I could only afford a bag of onions, a bag of pasta, and Kraft Parmesan cheese. She doesn't know about that. I want her to know about those parts. I lived and grew up in such a totally different universe than she did. And having her also allowed me to have a great amount of empathy for my mother, who was also a single parent, but did not have anywhere near the resources that I had. My mother was a radiation therapy nurse at Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute. She had a really, really tough life day in and day out. And so I think that was good for me for motherhood. I'm hoping that when she does eventually read the memoir, at least the first half, that she too will have more empathy for her mother. Yeah.
As your daughter, as you've said, is trying to, her goal is to be an actress. She seemingly works
and singer.
And she's working quite hard at it. Considering what you've learned about the entertainment industry, what do you hope for her? What are you afraid of? What do you try to tell her?
I'm trying to cultivate a disposition in her of a person who is a creative and an artist, and generating, she's equally passionate or maybe even more passionate about being an actor. I always try and encourage the music and the songwriting because she's an incredible songwriter. Of course I'm biased, but she's not sentimental, which is great. And even the songs she wrote when she was 7 and 8 are not sentimental. So That is something she can always do, even if she writes songs for other people. And that also will give her an authorship of her art. So I'm pushing that. But what I want her to remember is that it's not about numbers on social media. It's not about magazine covers, and it's not about the screenings or premieres that I sometimes take her to because I think she'd enjoy it. Now I say yes to things that I really don't want to go to, but I know she'll love. But I want her to really try and block all that out and consider her work as serious as a surgeon would.
Yeah.
Or, a forklift driver who, it's a dangerous job. So that's what I want for her. I think because she's also somebody who's really charismatic and gregarious, that I worry that she's going to get distracted by that stuff.
Yeah.
I took her social media away sort of in late stage pandemic because I saw it wasn't having a great effect and I didn't know any better. She's the only child, so she didn't see another child for 4 or 5 months during that really dark period of pandemic. And then when we realized what it was like, her father and I made the decision to take it away from her, and she still bristles at that decision, which she feels is really unfair. She just had her 16th birthday, so she also was like, I'm 16 now, and I say no.
Yeah.
For as long as I can rule any part of your life, I'm going to say no. And I hope that by the time she is 18, that I have brainwashed her enough to where she won't want social media. Because think about it, all the great actors, they don't. It's not like Angelina Jolie is posting, or I don't know if Jessica Chastain is, to be honest. I think she might have one.
She does, yeah.
But Jacob Elordi, or whoever. I just think that stuff is really easy to get distracted about, and I want some safe space for her where it's really just about honing her skill.
Yeah.
But she's a smart girl, so hopefully she'll...
It's so fun, because it's not unlike all parents' version of that, but it's also like, if you go on it, you're going to get too famous too fast for not what you actually want to be doing, and Hollywood loves nothing more than to pay you for what they want you to do and not pay you for what you want to do.
Exactly. And also, by the way, I've been a little more lenient about having her on my social media now than I used to be. I'm less protective of her, but that's also a concern. And that's a function of also giving her some taste of it because she doesn't get to post on her own stuff. But you're right. Like, as an actor, you want to be able to morph into the roles you're having, you're lucky enough to get, and not be looked at as one thing. And because she's attractive, she will get pigeonholed. It's worse for women than men. And I know what that's like.
Yeah. The reason we know each other partly is that in the last 10 years, partly because of your book, but you just have been willing to speak up, right? You just talk. You are you'll stay your opinions regardless of you'll name names. I think there's a lot of people in Hollywood who would not encourage. They want a vague statement about how vaguely you support all things, or you want everyone to love each other, or whatever the version of it is. And you've chosen not to do that for a variety of issues. And I was curious how one evolves from, were there times where you were encouraged or felt you should not speak up? And then how have you then learned you wanted to, or you should, or it's your place, or if you don't, no one will?
Well, I think a lot of the issues that I do speak up about are very personal to my own experience. And as hard as a earlier life, or, my first 40 years, let's say, as hard as my life has been, I've also been incredibly fortunate. And I'm really lucky to be able to do the things that genuinely interest me and stuff. So I feel like it's a way to almost pay it forward, and to sort of pass on that karma. That's part of it. Another part of it is that I just don't think the world is a fair place. And I don't think anything I say is going to make it fair. But I do think I have a debt to pay to the universe for giving me the opportunities that I have. My mother could have still had a tough marriage with my father, but maybe she wouldn't have been, if she wasn't educated, I would have still been in India stuck in some slum. Millions of people are. So luckily we were middle class. Luckily there was a medical personnel shortage in America when she needed to come here, et cetera. But also, one of the reasons I had a great example in my ex-husband who, spoke out against free speech. And also perhaps one could make an argument that he was also thrust into that position because of what happened to him. But, I think I learned by example. I have to give credit where credit is due. I don't know. I mean, there have been times when I have been told to cool it, because of people who pay me.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been offered jobs also that were very lucrative that I have turned down because one of the conditions of accepting that very lucrative job, which I could really use that money, if nothing else, to, donate to the ACLU or Planned Parenthood. I didn't take because it would involve me stepping down from my position as an artist ambassador at the ACLU or, turning my social media off and turning it into something very sort of generic and but we know who I am now. Even if I did that, the truth is you can Google all the op-eds I have done for the Washington Post and the New York Times or whatever.
Yeah, I was looking back, and the timeline is kind of wild, which is you did that tweet about Louis C.K. We got in touch. We planned a show 6 weeks later. In that interim, you write the piece about during the Brett Kavanaugh hearing was also in that same 2-week span. You come on stage, the first thing you say is "fuck Louis C.K."
Yeah,
first time you ever stand up stage and you said this. Where does that sort of righteousness live in you? Sort of how did you?
I think that righteousness comes out. And I hate identity politics, I really do, but it comes out from being a brown woman in a white male Hollywood. I think, it comes out, again, because of just the unfairness of it all. And it's also a reaction to the times I'm living in.
Yeah.
I haven't always been that way, we know this, but when President Trump the first time around made that tweet, I remember it very, very well. It was on a Friday. And he said, well, if it was so bad, why didn't she report? And all these women were tweeting, Time's Up and Me Too, right? And saying that they had had their experience. And I did that too. I was happy to be in that group of people who said, but wait a minute. And then I went to bed and it didn't sit well with me. What happened to me was really serious and life-altering and really affected the way that I moved in the world. It deserved more than a tweet.
Yeah.
And so I work on immigration rights for the ACLU, but I also work on women's rights. I've, picketed in front of McDonald's headquarters and gone to the Supreme Court and stuff. And so I called up Jessica, who's my rep at the ACLU, and I said, I'm thinking about doing this. I don't know what I'm going to say. I've never spoken about this. What do you think? And, it's really a credit to Jessica Weitz, who was very supportive and very tender and very instrumental in encouraging me to do it. And honestly, I didn't even know until Monday morning if I would ever publish it. And then I did publish it and I went to bed. I didn't leave the house for 3 whole days. And the first time I left the house was when I went to the gym. And I was shaking, I literally was shaking. Because mind you, I'd never shared that with my husband. I'd never shared that with my therapist. And I never shared that with my mother when it happened.
Yeah.
And I had been carrying around this thing since I was 16 years old. And by this time, I was well into my 40s. And it was really tough. I don't know if I would do it today knowing what I knew then. Because I didn't know that there was going to be this very vulnerable and emotional fallout for me psychically. It wasn't anything anybody else did. It was my choice. And I walked to the gym and I met this woman who just came up to me and she said, I want to tell you that I read your piece because a guy I went to college Or I think that, no, it wasn't at the gym. Somebody just came to tell me that they appreciated it.
Yeah.
But I was taking a train because I also was going to Boston to give a talk at MIT, because we have a endometriosis research, a gynopathology research center that we co-launched. Anyway, and I was really shaky about it. And I was waiting in line at Penn Station, and a woman came up to me, and she thanked me, and she said, the reason I read your piece is because a guy I went to college with sent it to me, along with an apology. And, I have been waiting for that apology for decades and never thought I would ever hear from this person or that I would get it.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't excuse what he does, but at least he knows what, he has some idea of how much what he did affect us. And I guess it affected him too. So that made me feel good. But every time somebody would come, now it doesn't affect me. I mean, it does a little, but,
of course.
But it was very difficult. It was more difficult after it came out than before it came out.
Yeah.
And I even think the day it was coming out, I think I took my daughter to the ballet. And I remember having to proofread the edits that the editors at the op-ed made to it. And so my assistant printed it out, and I was getting my makeup done because it was the opening of the opera. And I remember my makeup artist, Brigitte, I was crying as I read it, and she kept trying to patch me up, and I was happy to have the opera or the ballet to go to, at the Met, because that would mean I couldn't touch my phone. No one could talk to me. I'd just be sitting there with my kid watching whatever we were watching. And it was really tough, which is why, now that we're going through this Epstein stuff, I'm so in awe of all these women who've come out and to be re-triggered by all of this on a daily basis. I'm triggered by it, and I never met Epstein or knew who he was. Every time I open my social media, and it's good that we're talking about it, but it's also painful. Whenever there is growth, whether it's in a person or in a culture, there is pain. When something grows, something has to break for something else to break through. And I'm hoping that will be the case, and that, a lot of good will come out of this.
Does it feel like there's a different climate in terms of speaking up now, this term, than it was the first term? Have you noticed anything different? Do you feel any different?
Yes and no. Yes, I think people feel more empowered to speak out because a lot of people have spoken out. But sadly, we've also become desensitized, and that is the point and goal of this administration, is to just do so many things that you don't know which to focus on, and there's no time to address any one malfeasance, for lack of a better word, because there's so much of it.
In the All-American Cookbook, you say working on Taste the Nation made you feel more American than ever. Can you talk about why that was, and if that's still the case?
Yes. I mean, with everything with ICE that's going on today, and even while I was filming Taste the Nation in 2019, the first season was when I was out on the road, that was a reaction to the first Trump presidency and the Muslim ban and, all these kind of weird selections of who gets to call themselves American. So there's a lot to be upset about. But when you travel, Taste the Nation was basically one giant road trip.
Yeah.
When you travel neighborhood by neighborhood or city by city, and you meet these people, Cambodian ex-gang members, Cambodian American ex-gang members, dance teachers who are Peruvian American from New Jersey or what, I met people from all walks of life, and I cherish that experience. Mark Burnett, I met him once a long time ago, and he said that when he first came to this country, he and his father did the same thing, not for a TV show, but they traveled all over, and it really taught him about who America is. And I would say that is the same case for me, and it gave me hope. It made me feel much better about this country because on the ground, away from sort of all this media hype or Washington, D.C. politics and all this sort of posturing and blowhardiness that both sides have, people are just people. And they're not thinking in lofty ideology. They're thinking, can I feed my kids? Can I get a raise? Is my car going to work this winter? How can I take care of my elders?
Yeah.
And there aren't people say, like, I get this question a lot at, public appearances, especially like on book tour. How do you keep your Indian values and stuff, right? That's a big thing for Indian immigrants, like, adhering to our Indian values. And, my reaction to that is I think a lot of the values that we have as Americans do not rely on any ethnicity. They're more the same. And what I love about this country in its ideal, it's far from ideal, and it is far from reaching a utopia that it reaches for, that it strains to get closer to, is this fact of we are a body or a nation of people that is bound by a set of democratic values or principles as set out, supposedly, in the Constitution. And I think that's wonderful. I really think that that is very rare in the world. That, because even the Western European settlers or immigrants that came here, a lot of white people who don't think like I do think of those as quote unquote real Americans, but they're not. Unless you can call yourself a First Nations descendant, you're not. By that rubric, you're not a real American either. But I think what's exciting is that you can be part of the American experience by bringing whatever is the best you have to offer and in bettering your life, hopefully better the system or the culture and contribute to it. And the exchange is that you get to do so. There's no club. I mean, of course, there's an old boys club. There's all kinds of clubs. But, that promise is, I think, what makes America have any kind of cachet in the world. Because if you look at our foreign policy, even as far back as you want to, it's questionable at best. But I think in spite of that, the goodwill that America has in the world is this sort of beacon of hope, being the land that you too can share in. Yeah. And I think what's happening with ICE, and then I'll get off my soapbox. Sure. What's happening with ICE is really a shame, because I feel that kind of xenophobic thinking is short-sighted, because you will not be able to run this country if only white people existed in it. You won't. It's too late. Yeah. Sorry. You should have thought of that a long time ago. Yeah.
So now it's time for our final segment, which is like a lightning round, but you don't have to answer the questions quickly or anything. It's just questions I repeat every episode. Do you have a short story of an interaction with a legendary celebrity, living or dead, you're willing to share?
Oh, yes. I was invited to the World Cup of cricket to cut some ribbon or something in the early 90s. And it was in Calcutta. And I went, know nothing about cricket or don't remember from my childhood. And one of the only things I wanted to do was go and meet Mother Teresa. And so they took me with a group of people and my cousin, who was my date, to meet Mother Teresa at the Sisters of Mercy orphanage. And I'll never forget the experience. It was a gully off of some, neighborhood, and you walk these stairs, these cement stairs, and you go up. And it's like a dream. I walked there, and in a room, there was probably like 30 nuns on their knees, kneeling on the floor, all dressed in white, singing a hymn at once. And it was so beautiful. I'm getting chills just thinking about it now. And I'm not Catholic. I was educated in the Catholic system, but I'm not Catholic, obviously. But and then I met her, and I didn't realize how tiny she was. I also didn't realize that she had a club foot or some kind of, weird way of walking. Maybe she had polio when she was young. I'm not sure. And she was so charismatic, Jesse. It was like meeting Nicole Kidman, or I don't know. I don't know who it would be like. The only other experience I've had like that is when I met Muhammad Ali at the dry cleaners. Yeah. And those are my two totems of, sainthood / big time stars.
What's the best time? This doesn't have to be stand-up. What's the best time you ever bombed? So like the most glorious time you failed, it could be hosting, it could be modeling, where it's just sort of the worst version of you at a day or job.
When I was modeling, I used to model all the time for Sonia Rykiel and do all her runway shows. And one time, I there was a sale at the outdoor market in the Bastille in Paris where I bought my groceries, and they had a special. So I bought this giant bag of cashews and pistachios. And between the fitting and the actual show, I managed to gain 6 pounds and not fit into many of my clothes. And they had to sort of pin them and, jerry-rig them, and was not nice. And they kept saying, "What happened to you? What happened to you?" And I didn't even own a scale back then, So that was a lesson for me.
What is the best advice you took or the worst advice you didn't?
Okay. The best advice I took was when I was still making my living as a writer, as an actor, as a model, and I was just wetting my feet in that first show on the Food Network. And I think I had just published my cookbook, but, none of these one things would have made a living by themselves. And somebody said to me, just push against the open door. Don't try to decide who you are. Let the opportunities that do arise be made the most of. And I think that was a very useful. It's not what you want to do in life, and this took me a long time to learn, and I say this to other young women or men too. It's what you're good at.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't help what you're good at, and you can't help what you're bad at.
Yeah. What is one thing that is bad?
In general?
This is new, but we're trying it out. See?
Trump, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon.
Right. What is one thing that is good?
Comedy and laughter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.